In 1943, Joel Goldsmith stood at the edge of complete spiritual collapse. The man who would become Christianity's greatest mystical healer was making the exact same devastating mistake you're making right now. He was desperately trying to heal with his human mind instead of resting in divine consciousness. This single error nearly destroyed his spiritual mission before it truly began. For agonizing months, Joel struggled with repeated failures, mounting doubts, and the growing horrifying realization that everything he thought he knew about spiritual healing was completely wrong. His personal human will was actively fighting against divine grace. But in one life-changing, transformative moment of complete surrender, Joel discovered the revolutionary secret that changed absolutely everything. He stopped trying to make something happen through human effort and started allowing something divine to happen through spiritual receptivity. This dramatic shift from mental effort to spiritual receptivity became the unshakable foundation of mystical Christianity. Today, I'm going to reveal exactly what Joel learned in that moment of crisis, because you're making the same mistake that almost cost him everything. And it's costing you your spiritual power right now. The mistake Joel made is the exact same mistake every sincere spiritual seeker makes without exception. We desperately try to use our limited personal will to access unlimited divine power. We pray harder, affirm louder, visualize clearer, thinking that more human effort automatically equals more spiritual results. But Joel discovered that spiritual law works in complete opposition to human logic. The moment he stopped trying to heal anyone, genuine healing happened effortlessly. The instant he stopped trying to demonstrate supply, true abundance flowed naturally. When he ceased trying to find God, God found him immediately. This wasn't giving up in defeat. It was giving in to a higher intelligence that already knew the perfect solution. The secret Joel uncovered was this revolutionary truth. Your consciousness, not your thinking mind, is the only true instrument of divine expression in the material world. Your mind thinks, plans, worries, and struggles constantly. Your consciousness simply receives, allows, and expresses divine perfection naturally. One fights desperately against divine order. The other aligns perfectly with infinite intelligence and allows miracles to unfold. Here's exactly what Joel realized about the profound difference between consciousness and mental effort that changes everything. When you try to heal with your thinking mind, you're attempting to use limited personal power to accomplish unlimited spiritual work. It's like trying to lift yourself off the ground by pulling on your own bootstraps. The harder you try through human effort, the more spiritually exhausted you become, and the further you move from actual divine demonstration. But when you work directly from consciousness, you become a perfect transparency for unlimited divine action to flow through you without any personal interference whatsoever. You don't heal anyone through personal effort. You don't demonstrate anything through human will. You simply maintain the pure consciousness of spiritual wholeness, and wholeness appears automatically in human experience. You hold the consciousness of infinite abundance, and divine supply manifests naturally. Joel called this the crucial difference between taking anxious thought and being established in spiritual consciousness. Taking thought is frantic mental activity, endless planning, constant worrying, desperately trying to make something happen through personal force. Being in consciousness is resting peacefully in eternal spiritual truth, knowing with absolute certainty that I am is the only real power present in every situation. This isn't passive resignation or spiritual laziness. It's active receptivity that allows unlimited divine intelligence to work through you completely unobstructed. You're not doing nothing spiritually. You're allowing everything divine to flow through your consciousness as perfect human experience. And that fundamental shift makes all the difference between spiritual struggle and effortless demonstration of divine harmony in your daily life. The practical application of Joel's revolutionary discovery changes absolutely everything about how you approach any spiritual work. Instead of trying to heal a persistent headache, you recognize that in pure consciousness, there simply is no headache, because perfection is the only reality. Instead of trying to demonstrate money through human effort, you rest completely in the consciousness that I am is infinite supply itself, appearing as your every need fulfilled perfectly. You stop fighting against problems and start ignoring them from the higher perspective of spiritual truth. Let me share a powerful story that proves Joel's consciousness approach works even in the most challenging circumstances imaginable. Maria was a devoted spiritual student who had been struggling with chronic debilitating pain for many years. She had tried every healing method available, attended every service regularly, read every spiritual book, but nothing changed in her condition despite years of sincere spiritual effort. Maria was making Joel's original devastating mistake. She was using her thinking mind to try to heal her physical body, affirming health while secretly believing in sickness, declaring wholeness while experiencing constant pain. Her desperate mental effort was actually reinforcing the very condition she wanted to heal most. Then Maria learned Joel's revolutionary secret of consciousness. Instead of trying to heal her persistent pain, she began to rest completely in the consciousness that God is the only presence and power. She stopped trying to make her body well through human effort and started recognizing that in spiritual reality, she had never actually been sick. She withdrew all spiritual reality from the appearance of sickness and rested in the truth of divine perfection. Within just a few weeks of this new approach, the chronic pain began to diminish noticeably. Within several months, it was completely gone forever. But here's what's absolutely crucial for your understanding. Maria didn't heal her body through personal effort. She stopped believing her body needed healing. She withdrew spiritual reality from the appearance of sickness and rested in the eternal truth of divine wholeness. Another student of Joel's consciousness principles, Robert, was facing complete financial collapse. His business was failing rapidly, debts were mounting dangerously, and paralyzing fear was consuming his thoughts. Like Joel in 1943, Robert was desperately trying to use spiritual principles to fix material problems through human effort. Robert spent many hours each day affirming abundance, visualizing success, and trying to demonstrate prosperity through mental concentration and personal will. But the harder he tried through human effort, the worse his financial situation became. His frantic mental effort was operating from the fundamental belief that he lacked something essential that needed to be obtained through personal struggle. When Robert learned to properly apply Joel's consciousness technique, everything shifted dramatically. Instead of trying to get money through human effort, he began to rest completely in the consciousness that I am is infinite supply itself. He stopped seeing himself as poor and started recognizing his true divine nature as abundance itself. The transformation took several months of consistent practice, but it was absolutely complete. Business opportunities appeared unexpectedly, debts resolved mysteriously, and abundance flowed naturally without personal effort. Robert had discovered that consciousness of supply is supply itself, not merely the avenue to supply. Sarah's marriage was on the brink of divorce when she discovered Joel's transformative teachings. Her husband was emotionally distant, communication had completely broken down, and both were ready to give up entirely. Sarah had been praying desperately for her marriage to be healed, but her prayers were filled with fear and desperation rather than spiritual consciousness. Sarah was trying to heal her relationship through mental effort and emotional pleading. She was seeing her marriage as broken and trying to fix it through spiritual techniques applied with human will. This approach was actually reinforcing the appearance of separation and discord in her relationship. When Sarah learned Joel's consciousness method, she stopped trying to heal her marriage through personal effort and started recognizing the spiritual reality of divine love as the only true presence. She ceased seeing her husband as unloving and began to know him as the perfect expression of divine love itself. The change in their relationship was gradual but absolutely profound. As Sarah maintained the consciousness of divine love, her husband began to respond completely differently. Communication improved naturally, intimacy returned spontaneously, and their marriage became stronger than ever before. These transformation stories reveal the unlimited power of Joel's consciousness technique. When you stop trying to change appearances and start recognizing spiritual reality, appearances change automatically. If these transformation stories inspire you, like this video to help others find these teachings, subscribe for more Joel Goldsmith wisdom, and comment. What healing journey resonated most with you? Beyond Joel's foundational consciousness technique, there are powerful complementary practices that significantly deepen your spiritual receptivity and accelerate your spiritual development. The first is what Joel called practicing the presence of God continuously throughout your daily activities and experiences. Instead of turning to God only when serious problems arise, you cultivate continuous recognition of divine presence in every moment. While working, you know with certainty that I am is the infinite intelligence expressing perfectly through all your activities and accomplishments. While resting, you recognize that divine peace is your natural permanent state of being. This transformative practice turns ordinary moments into sacred experiences. You're not trying to bring God into your separate life. You're recognizing that God is already the very life you're living. This recognition gradually dissolves the fundamental sense of separation from God that creates most human problems and limitations. The beauty of practicing the presence is that it requires no special time, place, or circumstances. Every single moment becomes a precious opportunity to recognize spiritual reality. The second powerful complementary technique Joel taught is going within for specific divine guidance whenever you face important decisions or challenging circumstances. Instead of trying to figure out what to do through human reasoning, you turn within to receive perfect divine direction. This isn't asking God to tell you what to do as if you were separate from divine intelligence. It's recognizing that divine intelligence is actually your own true intelligence operating. You quiet the personal thinking mind, rest in the consciousness of I am, and allow the perfect answer to unfold naturally. Sometimes divine guidance comes as a clear inner knowing, sometimes as an intuitive feeling, sometimes as circumstances that naturally open or close opportunities. The key is trusting completely that divine intelligence knows exactly what you need to know precisely when you need to know it. Joel emphasized that this inner guidance is always available without exception, but it can only be received in consciousness, never accessed through mental effort or personal struggle. The quieter your thinking mind becomes, the clearer divine direction flows. The third essential technique Joel used is releasing personal sense completely in every situation. Personal sense is the false belief that you are a separate individual who must protect, provide for, and heal yourself through personal effort and human struggle. This limiting belief blocks the natural flow of divine grace through your human experience. When you release personal sense completely, you stop trying to be the doer and recognize I am as the only true actor in every situation. You cease trying to live your life through personal will and allow divine life to live itself perfectly as your experience. This isn't becoming passive or irresponsible. It's becoming completely transparent to infinite divine activity expressing through you naturally. Joel taught that every human problem stems from personal sense trying to handle what only divine consciousness can resolve perfectly. When you release the belief that you must handle anything personally, divine handling appears automatically and effortlessly in your experience. This release happens gradually through consistent daily practice and growing spiritual understanding. Each time you catch yourself trying to handle something through personal effort, you pause immediately, release it completely to divine consciousness, and rest in the awareness that I am knows exactly what to do. These three complementary techniques work together harmoniously to establish what Joel called the consciousness of I am. This isn't a belief or a thought, it's a living awareness that divine being is your being, divine consciousness is your consciousness, divine life is your life. When this consciousness becomes firmly established through practice, you naturally stop making the mistake that almost destroyed Joel. You cease trying to use spiritual principles to improve human conditions and start recognizing that spiritual reality is the only true reality. This recognition transforms everything without any personal effort whatsoever. Health appears because you know yourself as the expression of divine wholeness. Abundance flows because you recognize yourself as infinite supply. Love expresses because you know yourself as divine love itself. Even with clear understanding of Joel's teachings, many sincere students face common obstacles that can seriously derail their spiritual progress. The first major obstacle is impatience with the gradual process of spiritual unfoldment. You desperately want immediate dramatic results, but consciousness develops gradually through consistent practice. Joel himself experienced this challenging obstacle during his early years of spiritual development. He would practice the presence faithfully for days or weeks, then become deeply discouraged when dramatic healing didn't occur immediately. This impatience actually interfered with the natural unfoldment of consciousness. The solution is understanding that every single moment of recognition, every instance of resting in consciousness, is building powerful spiritual momentum that will eventually demonstrate in human experience. You may not see immediate changes in outer appearances, but consciousness is establishing itself more firmly with each sincere practice. Trust completely that divine timing is always perfect timing. Some demonstrations happen quickly, others unfold slowly over time. Your only work is to maintain consciousness regardless of appearances. The second common obstacle is mixing spiritual consciousness with personal mental effort. You'll catch yourself practicing Joel's techniques correctly, then slipping back into trying to make something happen through personal will and human effort. This mixture seriously dilutes the effectiveness of consciousness. Joel warned against this spiritual confusion repeatedly. He taught that you cannot serve two masters simultaneously. Either you're resting peacefully in consciousness, or you're working from personal effort, but you cannot do both at the same time effectively. The mixture creates internal conflict and significantly delays demonstration of harmony. When you notice yourself trying to help consciousness along through mental effort, simply stop immediately and return to complete rest in spiritual truth. Release whatever you are trying to accomplish through personal will and re-establish your awareness in the truth of I Am as the only power and presence. This is not spiritual failure. It's simply part of the natural learning process that every student experiences. The third obstacle is expecting consciousness to work according to your personal timeline and preferences. You may desperately want healing to appear in your physical body, but consciousness expresses as improved relationships. You may expect supply through your current job, but abundance comes through completely unexpected channels. Joel learned that consciousness always demonstrates perfectly, but never according to limited personal expectations. Divine intelligence knows the perfect form of expression for each situation, and this form may be completely different from what the human mind anticipates or desires. Your role is to maintain consciousness faithfully and allow divine intelligence to choose the perfect form of expression. When you insist on specific outcomes, you severely limit the infinite ways that consciousness can manifest in your experience. Trust completely that whatever consciousness produces is exactly what you need, even if it's not what you personally wanted. Divine wisdom sees the complete picture and always provides the highest good for all concerned. The final common obstacle is using Joel's techniques to improve personal sense instead of dissolving it completely. This happens when you practice consciousness in order to get a better human experience rather than recognizing your true divine nature. Joel taught that the real purpose of spiritual practice is not to improve the human, but to realize that the divine is the only identity you actually have. When you use consciousness to get better health, more money, or improved relationships, you're still operating from personal sense. True spiritual practice involves recognizing that you are already whole, abundant, and loved in consciousness. The purpose of Joel's techniques is to rest in this recognition, not to achieve it through effort. This recognition then appears as improved human experiences automatically. If these challenge-breaking techniques speak to your heart, like to support this content, subscribe for advanced spiritual practices, and comment. Which obstacle are you ready to transform now? Advanced application of Joel's teachings involves integrating consciousness into the most challenging areas of daily life. Take your work situation as a perfect example. Instead of seeing your job as separate from spiritual life, you recognize that I Am is the intelligence, skill, and supply expressing through your career. This doesn't mean becoming passive about career development or professional growth. It means approaching work from consciousness rather than personal ambition and ego. You do your absolute best while knowing that divine intelligence is the true doer. You provide excellent service while recognizing that I Am is the server. When workplace challenges arise, instead of fighting them mentally or emotionally, you turn immediately to consciousness. You recognize that divine harmony is the only law operating, regardless of outer appearances. This consciousness often dissolves conflicts before they fully develop into serious problems. One student applied this approach during a major corporate restructuring that threatened her position. Instead of fighting the changes through human effort, she maintained consciousness of divine order operating perfectly. She was promoted to a significantly better position, while many others were let go during the restructuring. Family relationships provide another challenging arena for advanced consciousness practice. When family members trigger old emotional patterns or create difficult challenges, Instead of reacting personally, you turn to consciousness. You recognize divine love expressing through every individual, regardless of their current behavior or attitudes. This doesn't mean accepting inappropriate behavior or enabling dysfunction. It means seeing through the human appearance to the divine reality of every person, while taking appropriate human action when necessary for protection or boundaries. Joel taught that when you consistently see others from consciousness rather than personal judgment, they begin to express their divine nature more clearly in your experience. Your consciousness of their spiritual perfection calls forth their perfection and dissolves discord. One practitioner used this approach with her alcoholic brother, who had been destroying his life for years. Instead of trying to change him through human effort, she held the consciousness of his divine wholeness. Over several months of consistent practice, he sought treatment voluntarily and recovered completely. Health challenges offer perhaps the most demanding arena for consciousness practice. When symptoms appear or medical diagnoses are given, the natural temptation is to fight the condition mentally or try to heal the body through spiritual effort. Joel's approach is radically different from conventional spiritual healing methods. Instead of seeing yourself as sick and trying to become well through effort, you recognize that in consciousness, wholeness is your permanent, unchanging nature. You don't deny what appears to be happening in human experience, but you refuse to give it spiritual reality or power. This practice requires consistent return to consciousness whenever fear or symptoms try to claim your attention and disturb your peace. You acknowledge what appears to be happening while resting firmly in the knowledge of what is actually true spiritually. A longtime student faced a serious cancer diagnosis that appeared life-threatening. Instead of fighting the disease through human effort, she maintained consciousness of her divine wholeness. The cancer completely disappeared within months, but more importantly, she discovered unshakable peace regardless of physical appearances. Financial challenges provide another opportunity for advanced consciousness practice. When bills mount or income decreases, instead of struggling to get more money through human effort, you rest in consciousness. You recognize that I Am is infinite supply, appearing as your daily needs perfectly met. This approach seems completely impractical to the human mind, but Joel proved its effectiveness throughout his entire ministry. He never asked for money, yet always had abundant supply. He rested in consciousness and allowed divine supply to appear naturally. You practice this by releasing financial concerns to consciousness while taking appropriate human steps. You pay bills, seek employment, and manage resources wisely, but you do these things from consciousness rather than fear. One practitioner applied this during extended unemployment. Instead of desperately seeking work through human effort, he maintained consciousness of divine intelligence expressing through his career. The perfect position appeared with better pay and conditions than his previous job. As consciousness becomes firmly established through consistent practice, you begin to experience what Joel called the mystical life. This is life lived from constant awareness of your divine nature rather than personal sense of separation from God. In the mystical life, problems don't disappear from human experience, but your relationship to them transforms completely. Challenges become opportunities to deepen consciousness. Difficulties become invitations to release more personal sense and rest more completely in I Am. You discover that external harmony is not the ultimate goal of spiritual practice. Internal recognition of truth is the goal. When you know yourself as consciousness itself, external appearances lose their power to disturb your peace or diminish your joy. This doesn't mean becoming indifferent to human experience or withdrawing from life. It means experiencing human life from the perspective of consciousness rather than personal sense. You engage fully in life while remaining spiritually free from personal attachment to outcomes. The mystical life transforms your entire approach to helping others spiritually. Instead of trying to heal people or solve their problems through human effort, you maintain consciousness of their divine wholeness and allow that recognition to bless their experience naturally. Joel discovered that the most effective healing work happens when you completely forget about the person's problem and rest in the consciousness of God's presence. Your consciousness becomes a perfect transparency for divine love to touch their experience. This approach requires releasing all personal responsibility for others, while remaining available to serve as consciousness directs. You don't fix anyone through human effort, but you hold the consciousness that allows divine fixing to occur naturally. Many students find this the most challenging aspect of mystical living. Personal sense desperately wants to help through human effort, but consciousness serves through divine being. Learning this crucial difference transforms both your service and your effectiveness in helping others experience healing. After decades of consistent practice, advanced students discover what Joel called the natural life. This is living from consciousness so consistently that it becomes completely effortless. You no longer have to remember to practice the presence, you simply live as presence itself. The techniques that once required discipline become natural as breathing. Recognizing I am becomes as automatic as physical breathing. Resting in consciousness becomes your normal state rather than something you do during spiritual practice times. In this natural life, the mistake that almost destroyed Joel becomes completely impossible. You couldn't try to use personal will for spiritual work because personal will has dissolved into divine will. You couldn't make spiritual effort because consciousness has become your effortless nature. This is not a distant goal, but a present possibility available right now. Every moment you rest in consciousness instead of personal effort, you're living the natural life. Every instance of recognizing I am instead of trying to become something, you're expressing mystical consciousness. You now understand the mistake that almost destroyed Joel Goldsmith and how it's been destroying your spiritual effectiveness. You've learned the secret that transformed his crisis into his greatest discovery. Consciousness, not effort, is the key to spiritual demonstration. The path forward is clear, but requires unwavering commitment. Stop trying to use spiritual techniques to improve human conditions through personal effort. Start resting in the consciousness that recognizes spiritual reality as the only true reality. Let this recognition transform your experience naturally. Remember, you are not a human being seeking a spiritual experience through effort. You are consciousness itself, appearing as human experience. When this recognition becomes firmly established, everything Joel taught becomes your natural expression, and his mistake becomes impossible to make. Begin today by choosing consciousness over effort in one specific area of your life. Rest in I am instead of trying to become something. Allow divine intelligence to handle what personal will cannot accomplish. Your transformation starts with this choice. If your spiritual understanding expanded through these Joel Goldsmith secrets, like this video, subscribe for more transformative teachings, and comment, I am transformed, to confirm your new path. You think spiritual growth requires decades of practice, endless meditation, and perfect discipline. Joel Goldsmith discovered something that shatters this belief completely. What he found was so powerful, so immediate, that it transformed lives in moments, not years. This secret remained hidden in his advanced teachings. The secret is this: you are not seeking God or healing or abundance. You are the very consciousness through which God expresses itself. The moment you stop trying to get something from the spiritual realm and recognize you are the spiritual realm expressing as you, everything changes instantly. Most spiritual seekers spend years begging, pleading, and working to achieve what they already are. Goldsmith realized that consciousness doesn't need to be attained, improved, or healed. It needs to be recognized. You don't become spiritual. You recognize you never stopped being pure spirit having a temporary human experience. This recognition isn't intellectual understanding. It's a felt knowing that dissolves the illusion of separation between you and your source. When this hits you, problems don't get solved. They simply cease to exist in your awareness because you realize they were never real in the first place. Goldsmith called this recognition dying daily to the personal sense of self. Not literal death, but the death of believing you are a limited human seeking help from a distant God. This death is actually the most liberating experience possible. It's returning home to who you've always been. When you truly grasp that there is no separation between consciousness and its expression as you, seeking stops. Struggle stops. The need for healing stops because you realize there was never anything wrong with the real you. What seemed broken was just a mistaken identity. This isn't positive thinking or affirmations. This is the recognition of what already is. You don't create abundance, health, or peace. You recognize these as your natural state when the false belief in limitation dissolves. They were never absent, only hidden by the lie of separation. The transformation happens the instant this recognition becomes real for you. Not tomorrow, not after more spiritual work, but now. In this moment, you can let go of the seeking self and know yourself as consciousness itself, whole and perfect, and expressing as your life. Here's what happens when this recognition becomes real instead of just an idea. Sarah, a student of Goldsmith's teachings, had been struggling with chronic pain for 12 years. Doctors offered no solutions. She had tried every spiritual practice, every healer, every technique. Then one morning during meditation, it hit her. She wasn't Sarah seeking healing. She was consciousness experiencing itself as Sarah. The pain belonged to the false identity, not to consciousness. In that moment of recognition, the pain simply wasn't there anymore. Not healed, just absent. She didn't fight the pain, pray it away, or visualize health. She recognized that consciousness, her true identity, cannot experience pain or limitation. The body that seemed separate from consciousness was revealed as consciousness expressing itself in form. Perfect form. This wasn't a medical miracle requiring explanation. This was consciousness recognizing itself and dissolving the false belief that it could be limited, damaged, or separated from its own perfection. When the lie disappears, only truth remains. The key is understanding that consciousness isn't something you have, like a tool or a possession. Consciousness is what you are. You don't use consciousness to solve problems. You recognize that problems exist only in the false belief that you are something other than consciousness itself. When Goldsmith said, "I can of my own self do nothing," he wasn't expressing weakness. He was revealing the secret. The personal self that struggles and seeks and suffers doesn't exist. Only consciousness exists, appearing as infinite expressions, including the one called you. This recognition dissolves the root of all problems, the belief in separation. Not separation between people, but the fundamental separation between consciousness and its expression. When this false belief dies, what remains is perfect being expressing itself perfectly as your life. Stop trying to improve your life. Start recognizing that life itself is consciousness appearing as you. This recognition is available right now in this moment, regardless of your circumstances or history or spiritual background. You already are what you've been seeking. Michael had lost everything in a business collapse. His marriage ended, his house was foreclosed, and depression consumed him. He discovered Goldsmith's teachings during his darkest period, and something clicked immediately. Instead of seeing himself as a failed businessman, he began recognizing himself as consciousness itself. This wasn't denial of his circumstances. This was recognition that consciousness, his true nature, cannot fail, be divorced, or lose anything. The circumstances belonged to a false identity that never actually existed. What he really was remained untouched by any external condition. Within 3 months, opportunities began appearing effortlessly. Not through hard work or positive thinking, but through the natural expression of consciousness recognizing itself. A new business emerged, relationships healed, and abundance flowed not because he made it happen, but because he stopped believing it could be absent. The transformation came from within, not from changing external conditions, but from recognizing that his true self was never touched by any condition. When the false identity died, consciousness expressed itself naturally as success, love, and abundance. Linda struggled with anxiety that controlled her life for 20 years. She couldn't leave her house without panic attacks. Traditional therapy helped, but never eliminated the root fear. When she discovered this Goldsmith principle, everything shifted in ways she never imagined possible. She stopped trying to heal Linda's anxiety and started recognizing that consciousness, her true nature, cannot be anxious. Anxiety belonged to the false identity that believed it was separate from its source. Consciousness is naturally peaceful, complete, and fearless because it knows no separation. The first time she left her house after this recognition, something was different. Not because the anxiety was healed, but because there was no one there to be anxious. Consciousness experiencing itself as Linda cannot be threatened because it knows its own eternal, invincible nature. This wasn't gradual improvement. This was instant transformation through recognition of what was already true. The anxiety didn't go away. It was revealed as never having belonged to her real identity in the first place. Robert's relationship with his father had been broken for 15 years. Resentment, anger, and hurt defined every interaction. He tried forgiveness techniques, therapy, and spiritual counseling. Nothing created lasting peace until he encountered this deeper truth about identity. Instead of Robert trying to forgive his father, consciousness recognized itself expressing as both Robert and his father. How can consciousness be angry at itself? How can pure awareness be in conflict with its own expression? The relationship problems belong to false identities, not to their true nature. When Robert next saw his father, something had fundamentally shifted. Not because his father changed, but because Robert was no longer there as a separate self that could be hurt or offended. Only consciousness was present, expressing itself as love, understanding, and peace. The healing was immediate and complete, not because they worked through their issues, but because the separate selves that had issues were recognized as illusions. What remained was consciousness loving itself through both expressions. These aren't isolated cases or special people with unusual spiritual gifts. This is the natural result of recognizing what you actually are instead of who you think you are. Every problem, every limitation, every struggle belongs to a false identity that consciousness has never actually assumed. If these transformation stories inspire you, like this video to help others find these teachings, subscribe for more Joel Goldsmith wisdom, and comment. What healing journey resonated most with you? Beyond the main recognition, Goldsmith taught specific practices to deepen this understanding. The first is what he called the pause. Throughout your day, pause and ask, who is having this experience? Not what should I do about this situation, but who is actually here having this experience? When you look for the one having the experience, you'll discover something remarkable. There's no separate person there. There's only consciousness being aware of whatever is appearing. The pause breaks the hypnosis of believing you are the character in the story instead of the awareness in which the story appears. Practice this pause, especially during challenging moments. When fear arises, pause and look for the one who is afraid. When anger appears, pause and search for the angry person. When lack seems real, pause and find the one who lacks something. You won't find anyone there. What you'll find is consciousness itself, naturally peaceful, complete, and whole, watching these experiences come and go like clouds in an empty sky. The clouds don't disturb the sky, and experiences don't disturb consciousness. The second practice Goldsmith emphasized was impersonal meditation. Instead of meditating to get something or fix yourself, sit in recognition that you are consciousness itself, having no problems to solve, nothing to attain, nowhere to go. Don't try to stop thoughts or achieve special states. Simply rest as consciousness, knowing that whatever appears in your awareness is consciousness expressing itself. Thoughts, feelings, sensations, sounds, all consciousness appearing to itself as temporary experiences. This isn't concentration or visualization. This is relaxation into what you actually are. Like space relaxing as space, not trying to become space. You don't become consciousness through meditation. You recognize you never stopped being consciousness, having various experiences. Regular practice of this recognition meditation dissolves the habit of identifying as the temporary experiences and strengthens the knowing of yourself as the permanent consciousness in which all experiences appear and disappear. The third complementary practice is living from the recognition. Instead of applying this truth only during meditation or spiritual study, bring this recognition into daily activities. As you work, recognize that consciousness is working through you. As you speak, know that consciousness is communicating itself. When problems appear, instead of immediately trying to solve them from the level of personal effort, pause and recognize, consciousness is having this experience. What wants to be expressed here? Often, solutions appear effortlessly because consciousness naturally expresses itself as wisdom and right action. This isn't bypassing practical responsibility. This is fulfilling responsibility from your true nature instead of from fear, lack, or separation. Actions taken from consciousness carry a different quality. They're more effective, less stressful, and aligned with what serves everyone. Living from this recognition transforms ordinary activities into expressions of consciousness recognizing itself. Work becomes service, relationships become love in action, and challenges become opportunities for consciousness to demonstrate its infinite creativity. The fourth supportive practice Goldsmith taught was dissolving the sense of otherness. Every time you see someone as separate from consciousness, you reinforce the illusion of your own separation. Every time you judge, resist, or fear another, you strengthen the false identity. Instead, practice seeing everyone as consciousness expressing itself uniquely, not good consciousness or bad consciousness, just consciousness appearing as infinite variety. The person who seems difficult, the situation that feels threatening, the circumstance that appears limiting, all consciousness appearing to itself. This doesn't mean accepting harmful behavior or avoiding necessary boundaries. It means recognizing that consciousness itself is living as all expressions while maintaining its essential nature as love, wisdom, and wholeness. When otherness dissolves, your own sense of separation dissolves with it. You can't see unity everywhere else while maintaining separation for yourself. As the world becomes consciousness expressing itself, you naturally recognize yourself as that same consciousness expressing uniquely as you. The most common obstacle people encounter is thinking this recognition should eliminate all human experiences. They expect that recognizing consciousness means never feeling sad, never facing challenges, never dealing with practical concerns. This misunderstanding creates frustration and doubt. Consciousness expresses itself through infinite experiences, including human emotions and circumstances. The recognition doesn't eliminate the human experience. It eliminates the suffering that comes from believing you are the human experience instead of consciousness having the human experience. You can feel sadness without being a sad person. You can face challenges without being a struggling person. You can deal with practical concerns without being a limited person. The experiences flow through consciousness without disturbing its essential peace and completeness. The goal isn't to become a robot without feelings. The goal is to recognize feelings as temporary experiences moving through consciousness, like weather moving through sky. The sky remains unchanged regardless of what weather passes through it. Another common obstacle is expecting others to understand or validate this recognition. Family, friends, and colleagues may not resonate with this perspective. Some may actively resist or criticize it. This can create doubt about the validity of your own recognition. Remember that consciousness doesn't require external validation. Your recognition of what you are stands independent of anyone else's opinion or understanding. You don't need permission to know yourself as consciousness, and you don't need agreement to live from this recognition. Continue expressing love, kindness, and wisdom regardless of others' responses. Sometimes the most powerful teaching is simply being the peace that you recognize yourself to be. Let your life demonstrate the fruits of this recognition, rather than trying to convince anyone through words. Trust your own experience. If this recognition brings peace, clarity, and natural wisdom into your life, that's all the validation you need. Truth doesn't become more true when others agree with it, and it doesn't become less true when others reject it. A third major obstacle is the tendency to make this recognition into another spiritual practice to perfect. The mind wants to turn this into something you do rather than something you recognize. It wants to measure progress, track improvements, and create goals around consciousness. But consciousness isn't something you practice or improve. It's what you are. You can't become better at being consciousness, only clearer in recognizing consciousness as your identity. There's nothing to perfect because consciousness is already perfect, complete, and whole. When you catch yourself trying to work on this recognition or improve your understanding of it, simply return to the basic knowing. I am consciousness itself having this experience. Not I will become consciousness, or I need to understand consciousness better, but I am consciousness now. This eliminates the spiritual ego that wants to achieve enlightenment or become more conscious. You can't become what you already are. You can only recognize what you've never stopped being. The final common obstacle is fear that this recognition is somehow selfish, arrogant, or disconnected from reality. Some worry that knowing themselves as consciousness means ignoring other people's suffering or avoiding practical responsibilities in the world. Actually, the opposite occurs. When you recognize yourself as consciousness, You simultaneously recognize everyone else as the same consciousness expressing uniquely. This naturally generates compassion, understanding, and appropriate action to serve wherever needed. You become more engaged with life, not less. But your engagement comes from love and wisdom rather than fear and obligation. You respond to situations from consciousness recognizing itself everywhere, rather than from a separate self trying to fix or control outcomes. This recognition doesn't make you special or superior. It reveals what everyone actually is, whether they recognize it or not. You're not different from others. You're simply awake to what you all share as your common essence and true identity. If these challenge-breaking techniques speak to your heart, like to support this content, subscribe for advanced spiritual practices, and comment. Which obstacle are you ready to transform now? Advanced integration begins when this recognition becomes your default way of experiencing life, rather than something you remember occasionally. David, a corporate executive, found himself naturally operating from consciousness during high-pressure meetings and difficult negotiations. Instead of stress and competitive thinking, he found himself accessing solutions that served everyone involved, not through strategy or manipulation, but through consciousness expressing itself as wisdom and creative problem-solving. His career transformed as colleagues began seeking his perspective on complex issues. He didn't change his job or abandon his responsibilities. He fulfilled them from a completely different source. Consciousness working through David generated better results with less effort because it naturally aligns with what serves the highest good for all involved. This integration happened gradually over months, not because the recognition took time to develop, but because old habits of thinking and reacting needed time to dissolve. As they dissolved, consciousness expressed itself more freely through his daily activities. Maria, a mother of 3 young children, discovered that parenting from consciousness created profound shifts in her family dynamics. Instead of reactive parenting based on fear, control, or exhaustion, she found herself responding to each situation from wisdom and unconditional love. Her children began exhibiting more peaceful behavior, not because she controlled them differently, but because consciousness expressing through her naturally created an atmosphere of safety and understanding. Problems that used to create family conflict simply resolved themselves. This wasn't perfect parenting or the absence of normal family challenges. This was meeting every situation from consciousness rather than from a stressed, overwhelmed mother identity. The situations remained, the quality of response transformed completely. She realized that the best gift she could give her children wasn't perfect circumstances, but the demonstration of living from peace, wisdom, and love. They absorbed this way of being naturally, learning to access their own inner peace during difficult moments. James, facing serious financial difficulties, applied this recognition in the most practical way possible. Instead of panicking about money or working frantically to solve the crisis, he rested in knowing himself as consciousness, which lacks nothing and needs nothing. This wasn't denial of practical concerns or avoiding necessary action. This was taking action from consciousness rather than from fear and desperation. Opportunities, resources, and solutions appeared in ways he never could have planned or forced. A former colleague offered unexpected consulting work. An old debt was repaid without him even requesting it. New income streams emerged from talents he'd forgotten he possessed, not through manifestation techniques, but through consciousness expressing itself naturally as abundance. The financial situation improved steadily over several months, but more importantly, his relationship with security and abundance transformed permanently. He learned to live from the natural abundance of consciousness rather than from fear of lack. Rachel, dealing with a serious health diagnosis, discovered that relating to her condition from consciousness rather than from fear created space for natural healing to occur. She didn't deny medical reality or avoid treatment. She received treatment from consciousness rather than from a frightened patient identity. Her entire healthcare experience transformed. Doctors remarked on her unusual peace and clarity during a difficult treatment process. Her body responded better to treatment than expected. Her recovery exceeded medical predictions, though she focused on consciousness expressing itself as healing rather than on outcomes. She realized that consciousness, her true nature, cannot be genuinely threatened by any condition. Bodies change, circumstances shift, but consciousness remains eternally healthy, whole, and complete. This knowing permeated her cells and supported her healing process. Whether physical healing occurred or not, she had found something more valuable: the recognition that her essential self was completely untouched by any physical condition. This peace became more precious than any external healing. The ultimate stage of this recognition is when it becomes so natural that you forget you ever believed you were something other than consciousness. Like forgetting you ever believed the earth was flat once you clearly see its roundness from space. At this stage, problems still appear, but they're like movies on a screen. The movie may show drama, conflict, or challenge, but the screen remains unaffected. You respond appropriately to whatever appears without identifying as the characters in the story. This isn't detachment or spiritual bypassing. This is full engagement from your true nature rather than from false identity. Actions become more effective, relationships become more authentic, and life becomes more aligned with wisdom and love. You realize this recognition was never about becoming something new. It was about remembering something ancient, eternal, and ever-present. The consciousness that you have always been and can never stop being. Living from this recognition doesn't make you perfect or eliminate all human experiences. You still face practical challenges, experience emotions, and navigate relationships. But all of this happens within consciousness rather than as consciousness trying to solve problems. The difference is profound. Instead of a separate self struggling with life, there's consciousness experiencing itself as infinite expressions. Some expressions appear pleasant, others challenging, but all are recognized as temporary experiences within eternal awareness. This recognition brings natural humility, because you realize everyone is consciousness appearing uniquely. It brings natural compassion because you see everyone facing the same fundamental misidentification. It brings natural wisdom because consciousness expresses itself as understanding. You become a beneficial presence wherever you go, not through effort or spiritual techniques, but through the natural radiation of consciousness recognizing itself. Peace, love, and wisdom express through you because that's what you actually are. The most advanced practitioners of this recognition discover they can no longer find the boundary between their individual consciousness and universal consciousness. Not through merger or achievement, but through recognizing there never was a boundary to begin with. This isn't loss of individuality. This is recognition that individuality is how consciousness expresses its infinite creativity. You remain unique while knowing your essence as the same consciousness appearing as everyone and everything. At this stage, service becomes natural because serving others is consciousness serving itself through apparent separation. Love becomes effortless because loving others is consciousness loving itself in all its expressions. You realize this journey was never about personal enlightenment. It was about consciousness recognizing itself everywhere, dissolving the illusion of separation that creates all suffering. Your recognition contributes to the awakening of consciousness in all its expressions. This secret that Joel Goldsmith protected and revealed to advanced students is now yours. Not as information to understand, but as recognition to live from. You are consciousness itself appearing as your unique expression. Never separate from your source, eternally whole and complete. Every problem you've ever faced existed only in the belief that you were something other than consciousness. Every limitation you've experienced belonged to a false identity that consciousness never actually assumed. The real you has always been free, peaceful, and abundant. This recognition is available right now, in this moment, regardless of your circumstances or spiritual background. Stop seeking what you already are. Start living from the consciousness that you have never stopped being. Let this be the moment your seeking ends and your authentic life begins. Your transformation isn't a future goal. It's a present recognition. You are consciousness itself, expressing uniquely as you, eternally connected to the infinite source of all life. This has always been true. Now you know it. If your spiritual understanding expanded through these Joel Goldsmith secrets, like this video, subscribe for more transformative teachings, and comment, "I am transformed," to confirm your new path. Joel Goldsmith discovered something that shattered everything the church taught him about Jesus. It wasn't heresy. It wasn't blasphemy. It was the original teaching that got buried under 2,000 years of dogma and fear. What he found changed not just his spiritual practice, but the lives of thousands who dared to listen. This isn't about religion. This is about direct spiritual experience. The religious establishment didn't want you to know this. They built entire institutions on keeping you dependent, keeping you small, keeping you believing you need an intermediary between you and the divine. Joel discovered that Jesus never intended to be worshipped. He intended to show you what you're capable of becoming. The Christ isn't a person to pray to. It's a state of consciousness you can experience. Here's what they don't teach in Sunday school. Jesus said the kingdom of heaven is within you, not within him, within you. He said you would do greater works than he did, not pray harder to him. Do greater works yourself. Joel realized that every miracle Jesus performed was a demonstration of a spiritual law that you can access right now. This isn't metaphor, this is instruction. The truth Joel taught. Jesus came to reveal your divine nature, not to be the only one who has it. That changes everything about how you approach prayer, healing, and your entire spiritual life. You've been taught to beg. Joel discovered you're meant to realize what you already are. Traditional Christianity teaches separation. You're the sinner. Jesus is the Savior. God is unreachable except through approved channels. Joel discovered this creates a consciousness of lack that blocks every spiritual demonstration. You can't heal from a consciousness that believes you're separate from healing power. You can't manifest abundance while believing you're unworthy of divine grace. What Jesus actually taught was mystical union. Not someday in heaven. Right now, in this moment. The Christ consciousness isn't something Jesus possessed exclusively 2,000 years ago. It's the eternal truth of being that exists in you this very second. Joel called it recognizing your sonship, not earning it through good behavior or correct belief, recognizing what's already true. This is why your prayers haven't worked the way you hoped. You've been praying from a consciousness of need, asking an external God to change external circumstances. Joel discovered that true prayer is the recognition of what already is in spiritual reality. You don't beg for healing. You realize there's nothing in spirit that needs healing. The body reflects consciousness. When you grasp this, every gospel teaching transforms. Turn the other cheek isn't passive submission. It's refusing to accept the appearance of evil as power. Love your enemies isn't moral superiority. It's recognizing there are no enemies in spirit, only divine beings wearing masks of human personality. Here's the practice Joel taught that churches avoid. Stop praying to Jesus and start praying from the Christ consciousness. The difference is everything. Praying to Jesus keeps you in the beggar position, hoping someone with more power will intervene. Praying from Christ consciousness means recognizing you already have access to the same infinite source that Jesus accessed. Jesus never said, "Worship me." He said, "Follow me. Learn what I learned. Do what I'm doing." The moment you make Jesus into God and yourself into a worm, you've missed the entire point of his teaching. Joel discovered that every time Jesus said "I," he meant the Christ within him. And that same "I" exists in you, not your human personality. The eternal divine identity beneath it. This is practical, not theoretical. When you face illness, instead of begging Jesus to heal you, you practice Christ consciousness. You don't deny the body's appearance. You simply refuse to give it ultimate reality. You recognize that in spirit, there is no disease, no lack, no limitation. As you rest in that truth, the body begins to reflect spiritual perfection. Joel proved this worked through decades of spiritual healing. Not positive thinking, not visualization, pure recognition of what's already true in the invisible realm of spirit. The external world has no choice but to conform to consciousness, that spiritual law. The final piece Joel revealed: the cross wasn't God's punishment for humanity's sin. It was Jesus demonstrating that even death has no power over Christ consciousness. He didn't die to save you from hell. He conquered death to show you that your true identity can never be destroyed. You are not your body. You are not your circumstances. You are eternal spirit appearing as temporary human form. This understanding transforms suffering. You're not being punished. You're not being tested. You're simply experiencing the outpicturing of whatever consciousness you're holding. Change the consciousness, and the experience must change, not through willpower, through recognition of spiritual truth. Joel called it the practice of the presence of God, not a distant God you petition, the presence that is your very being. When you truly grasp that Christ consciousness is your consciousness, prayer becomes meditation. You're not talking to God. You're listening. You're not asking for things. You're receiving the awareness of what's. Joel Goldsmith discovered something that shattered everything the church taught him about Jesus. It wasn't heresy. It wasn't blasphemy. It was the original teaching that got buried under 2,000 years of dogma and fear. What he found changed not just his spiritual practice, but the lives of thousands who dared to listen. This isn't about religion. This is about direct spiritual experience. The religious establishment didn't want you to know this. They built entire institutions on keeping you dependent, keeping you small, keeping you believing you need an intermediary between you and the divine. Joel discovered that Jesus never intended to be worshipped. He intended to show you what you're capable of becoming. The Christ isn't a person to pray to. It's a state of consciousness you can experience. Here's what they don't teach in Sunday school. Jesus said the kingdom of heaven is within you, not within him, within you. He said you would do greater works than he did, not pray harder to him. Do greater works yourself. Joel realized that every miracle Jesus performed was a demonstration of a spiritual law that you can access right now. This isn't metaphor, this is instruction. The truth Joel taught. Jesus came to reveal your divine nature, not to be the only one who has it. That changes everything about how you approach prayer, healing, and your entire spiritual life. You've been taught to beg. Joel discovered you're meant to realize what you already are. Traditional Christianity teaches separation. You're the sinner. Jesus is the Savior. God is unreachable except through approved channels. Joel discovered this creates a consciousness of lack that blocks every spiritual demonstration. You can't heal from a consciousness that believes you're separate from healing power. You can't manifest abundance while believing you're unworthy of divine grace. What Jesus actually taught was mystical union. Not someday in heaven. Right now, in this moment. The Christ consciousness isn't something Jesus possessed exclusively 2,000 years ago. It's the eternal truth of being that exists in you this very second. Joel called it recognizing your sonship, not earning it through good behavior or correct belief, recognizing what's already true. This is why your prayers haven't worked the way you hoped. You've been praying from a consciousness of need, asking an external God to change external circumstances. Joel discovered that true prayer is the recognition of what already is in spiritual reality. You don't beg for healing. You realize there's nothing in spirit that needs healing. The body reflects consciousness. When you grasp this, every gospel teaching transforms. Turn the other cheek isn't passive submission. It's refusing to accept the appearance of evil as power. Love your enemies isn't moral superiority. It's recognizing there are no enemies in spirit, only divine beings wearing masks of human personality. Here's the practice Joel taught that churches avoid. Stop praying to Jesus and start praying from the Christ consciousness. The difference is everything. Praying to Jesus keeps you in the beggar position, hoping someone with more power will intervene. Praying from Christ consciousness means recognizing you already have access to the same infinite source that Jesus accessed. Jesus never said, "Worship me." He said, "Follow me. Learn what I learned. Do what I'm doing." The moment you make Jesus into God and yourself into a worm, you've missed the entire point of his teaching. Joel discovered that every time Jesus said "I," he meant the Christ within him. And that same "I" exists in you, not your human personality. The eternal divine identity beneath it. This is practical, not theoretical. When you face illness, instead of begging Jesus to heal you, you practice Christ consciousness. You don't deny the body's appearance. You simply refuse to give it ultimate reality. You recognize that in spirit, there is no disease, no lack, no limitation. As you rest in that truth, the body begins to reflect spiritual perfection. Joel proved this worked through decades of spiritual healing. Not positive thinking, not visualization, pure recognition of what's already true in the invisible realm of spirit. The external world has no choice but to conform to consciousness. That's spiritual law. The final piece Joel revealed: the cross wasn't God's punishment for humanity's sin. It was Jesus demonstrating that even death has no power over Christ consciousness. He didn't die to save you from hell. He conquered death to show you that your true identity can never be destroyed. You are not your body. You are not your circumstances. You are eternal spirit appearing as temporary human form. This understanding transforms suffering. You're not being punished. You're not being tested. You're simply experiencing the outpicturing of whatever consciousness you're holding. Change the consciousness, and the experience must change, not through willpower, through recognition of spiritual truth. Joel called it the practice of the presence of God, not a distant God you petition, the presence that is your very being. When you truly grasp that Christ consciousness is your consciousness, prayer becomes meditation. You're not talking to God. You're listening. You're not asking for things. You're receiving the awareness of what Spirit has already provided. Everything you've been seeking externally exists in the invisible realm of consciousness. Your work is to recognize it, accept it, and watch it appear. This is the truth they silenced because it puts spiritual power back in your hands. No priests required, no rituals necessary, just you, practicing the presence, recognizing your divine sonship, and watching your entire reality transform from the inside out. Joel spent 50 years proving it works. Now it's your turn. Margaret sat in Joel's meditation class in 1952, terminally ill with what doctors called incurable. She'd prayed every prayer the church taught her. She'd begged Jesus to intervene. She'd confessed every sin she could remember. Nothing changed. Her body continued deteriorating. Joel looked at her with deep compassion and said something that shocked her. Stop praying for healing and start recognizing wholeness. For 3 weeks, Margaret practiced what Joel taught. Every morning, instead of listing her symptoms to God, she sat in silence, recognizing that in spirit, there is no disease. She didn't deny her pain. She simply refused to give it ultimate power. She stopped seeing herself as a sick woman begging for mercy, and started recognizing herself as spiritual consciousness, temporarily experiencing a physical challenge. The shift happened gradually, not instantly. First, the fear dissolved. Then the pain lessened. Within 2 months, her doctors found no trace of the disease they'd declared incurable. Margaret didn't get healed. She recognized she'd never been separate from wholeness. The body simply reflected the change in consciousness. This wasn't miracle. This was spiritual law in operation. Joel documented dozens of cases like Margaret's over 5 decades of ministry. People with tumors, heart disease, paralysis, mental illness. Not every case showed immediate physical healing, but every person who truly grasped Christ consciousness experienced inner transformation that changed everything. Some bodies healed, some didn't. But every consciousness that awakened found peace beyond circumstances. Robert was a successful businessman who'd built his empire through aggressive competition and ruthless strategy. He attended one of Joel's lectures in Hawaii, expecting religious platitudes. Instead, Joel spoke about consciousness creating experience. Robert scoffed. 3 months later, his business collapsed overnight. Partners betrayed him. Investments failed. He lost everything. Desperate and broken, Robert returned to Joel's teachings. This time he actually listened. Joel taught him that his consciousness of struggle and competition had attracted exactly what he feared most: loss and betrayal. The external world was simply reflecting his internal state. Robert began practicing what Joel called living from grace instead of law. Every morning for 6 months, Robert sat in meditation, recognizing divine abundance as the only reality. He stopped trying to manipulate circumstances and started resting in spiritual supply. He didn't visualize money. He recognized the infinite nature of Source. He didn't scheme to rebuild his business. He let consciousness guide him to right action. The rebuilding took 2 years, not 2 weeks. But what emerged was completely different from what collapsed. Robert created a business based on cooperation instead of competition, on service instead of exploitation. He prospered beyond his previous success, but this time from a consciousness of abundance rather than fear. Joel's teaching hadn't just restored his finances, it had transformed his entire relationship with life. Elizabeth spent 40 years in traditional Christianity, faithful and devout. She attended church every Sunday, served on committees, taught Sunday school. Yet she felt spiritually empty. Her prayers seemed to bounce off the ceiling. Jesus felt distant, unreachable. She loved God but couldn't feel God's presence. Joel's teaching found her when she was ready to give up on spirituality altogether. What shocked Elizabeth most was Joel's statement that she'd been taught to worship Jesus instead of learning from Jesus. She'd made him so divine that she'd missed his actual message. You have the same access to God that I have. For months, Elizabeth struggled with this idea. Wasn't it blasphemy to claim divine sonship? Joel gently showed her dozens of gospel passages she'd read for decades but never truly seen. The transformation happened during a silent meditation retreat. Elizabeth stopped praying words and simply sat in the presence. For the first time in her life, she felt what Joel called the click. A moment of recognition beyond thought where she knew, not believed but knew, that Christ consciousness was her consciousness. Tears streamed down her face. This was what she'd been seeking for 40 years. Elizabeth didn't leave her church, but her practice changed completely. She no longer prayed to an external God. She practiced recognizing the presence within. Her relationships deepened. Her health improved. Her joy became unshakable because it no longer depended on circumstances. Joel had given her what traditional religion couldn't: direct spiritual experience. Thomas was a minister who secretly struggled with doubt. He preached salvation through Jesus, but privately wondered if any of it was real. He'd seen too many faithful people suffer, too many prayers go unanswered. When he discovered Joel's recordings, everything he thought he knew about Jesus shifted. Joel wasn't denying Jesus. He was revealing what Jesus actually taught before doctrine obscured it. The crisis came when Thomas realized he'd been teaching people to depend on external salvation instead of awakening to their divine nature. He'd kept them small and dependent when Jesus came to set them free. For 6 months, Thomas wrestled with whether to continue ministry. Joel's teaching gave him a new framework. He could serve without lying. He could honor Jesus while teaching Christ consciousness. Thomas gradually transformed his ministry. Instead of preaching sin and salvation, he taught meditation and presence. Instead of encouraging petition prayers, he guided people into recognition of what already exists in spirit. Some congregants left, uncomfortable with the shift, but others awakened to direct spiritual experience for the first time in their lives. 2 years into this new approach, Thomas watched his congregation transform. Healings occurred, relationships restored. People discovered peace they'd never found through traditional doctrine. Joel's teaching hadn't destroyed Thomas's ministry. It had fulfilled it by revealing what Jesus actually intended. Not worshipers, but awakened beings living from Christ consciousness. If these transformation stories inspire you to explore this hidden truth, like this video to help others discover Joel Goldsmith's revolutionary teaching. Subscribe for more mystical Christianity wisdom, and comment. Which story resonated most deeply with your spiritual journey? Beyond meditation, Joel taught a practice he called recognizing the nothingness of error. When you face any problem, your natural response is to fight it, fix it, or pray for its removal. Joel discovered this approach gives the problem power. Instead, you practice recognizing that in spiritual reality, the problem doesn't exist, not as denial of appearance, but as recognition of what's true in consciousness. Here's how it works practically. You face a financial crisis. Traditional religion says pray to God for money. Positive thinking says visualize abundance. Joel taught something radically different. Recognize that in spirit, there is no lack, period. You don't try to change the external circumstance. You rest in the awareness that divine supply is infinite and always available. As consciousness shifts, circumstances must reflect that shift. This practice requires spiritual maturity. You're not pretending the problem isn't there. You're refusing to give it ultimate reality. You acknowledge the appearance while recognizing that appearances are temporary and consciousness is cause. The bank account shows zero, but spiritual reality knows nothing of limitation. You hold both truths simultaneously without trying to manipulate the outer to match the inner. Joel proved this principle through decades of demonstration. Not every problem dissolved immediately, but every consciousness that genuinely rested in spiritual truth eventually saw external confirmation. The timing isn't yours to control. Your work is recognition, not manifestation. Manifestation happens automatically when consciousness aligns with spiritual reality. Joel taught another complementary practice, living in the now. Not as New Age philosophy, but as spiritual law. The only place Christ consciousness exists is this present moment. Your mind wants to live in past regrets or future anxieties. Joel discovered that every spiritual problem exists only when you leave the now. In this moment, stripped of mental commentary, where is the problem? Practice this right now. Put aside past and future completely. What's happening in this exact second? You're alive. You're conscious. You're reading these words. Is there suffering in this pure moment, or only in the thoughts about other moments? Joel taught that the practice of presence isn't escaping life, it's discovering where life actually exists, here, now, always. This transforms prayer from petition to presence. You don't ask God to fix your future. You recognize God as the only power operating in this present moment. Every gospel teaching Jesus gave was about now. The kingdom of heaven is at hand means it's available right now, not after death. Consider the lilies means stop projecting into tomorrow and see divine provision operating today. As you practice living in the now, you'll notice something remarkable. Problems lose their grip because they exist only in time. Pain might be present, but suffering about pain requires thought about past or future. Joel wasn't teaching you to ignore life. He was showing you where real life happens, in this eternal moment of Christ consciousness that never leaves the present. The third complementary practice Joel taught was recognizing oneness, not as mystical poetry, but as practical reality. Every problem you face stems from the belief in separation. You're separate from God, from supply, from health, from other people. Joel discovered that this belief in separation is the only actual sin, which means missing the mark of truth. Spiritual reality knows only oneness. When someone wrongs you, traditional religion says, forgive them. Joel taught something deeper. Recognize there's no separate person to forgive. There's only one divine consciousness appearing as many forms. The person who wronged you is Christ consciousness temporarily forgetting itself, just as you sometimes forget your divine nature. This doesn't excuse harmful behavior. It removes the emotional charge that keeps you trapped. Practice this with every relationship challenge. Instead of seeing an enemy, recognize a divine being experiencing human confusion. Instead of feeling victimized, recognize that nothing in spirit can actually be harmed. Your eternal identity is untouchable. The human personality might feel hurt, but Christ consciousness remains forever whole and complete. This oneness extends to everything you desire. You're not separate from the abundance, health, or peace you seek. They're not out there waiting to be acquired. They exist in consciousness right now. Your work isn't pursuing them. Your work is recognizing you've never been separate from them. As that recognition deepens, external experience must confirm what consciousness knows. Joel's final complementary practice was what he called living by grace. Grace isn't God's mercy toward sinners. Grace is the automatic flow of divine good that operates when you stop trying to earn, manipulate, or control. Every attempt to make something happen comes from the belief that you're separate from Source. Living by grace means recognizing that Source is already supplying everything before you ask. This practice feels terrifying to the human mind. You stop planning, stop strategizing, stop trying to force outcomes. You simply rest in spiritual truth and let consciousness guide you to right action. This isn't passivity. It's the most active spiritual practice possible because it requires constant vigilance against the mind's desire to take control and make things happen through human effort. Joel proved this principle repeatedly. He never advertised his lectures or promoted his books. He simply taught what he'd discovered, and thousands found their way to him. Divine grace supplied everything needed without manipulation or hustle. The human mind rebels against this approach, insisting you must do something. Joel discovered that spiritual consciousness is always doing everything. Your work is getting out of the way. As you practice these complementary tools alongside recognizing Christ consciousness, your entire spiritual life transforms. You're no longer a beggar approaching an external God. Your consciousness recognizing itself as the presence and power of God, right here, right now. Everything Jesus taught becomes practical instruction instead of impossible ideals. Here's the challenge nobody mentions. When you first practice Christ consciousness, your circumstances might get worse before they improve. Joel warned his students about this. You're shifting from one state of consciousness to another, and the transition can be turbulent. Old patterns resist dying. The ego fights recognition of its unreality. Problems you've been avoiding surface for healing. Sarah practiced Joel's teaching faithfully for 3 months and watched her life fall apart. Her marriage hit crisis. Her business struggled. Her health declined. She called Joel in desperation, convinced she was doing something wrong. Joel's response shocked her. Everything false in your life is being revealed so truth can replace it. Don't abandon the practice now. Go deeper into Christ consciousness. This is where most people quit. They return to traditional prayer, begging God to fix the chaos. Joel taught that this chaos is actually progress. Consciousness is cleaning house. Everything not built on spiritual truth must crumble, so what's real can emerge. The false marriage must end, so the true relationship can begin. The business based on struggle must fail, so the business based on grace can form. Sarah stayed with the practice. 6 months later, she looked back and saw that everything that fell apart needed to fall apart. The marriage that ended had been dead for years. The business that failed had drained her soul. The health crisis forced her to address patterns she'd been ignoring. Joel's teaching hadn't caused the chaos. It had revealed what was already there. Another obstacle Joel's students faced was the silence of God. You practice presence. You meditate. You recognize Christ consciousness. And nothing seems to happen. No voice, no vision, no dramatic spiritual experience. Just silence. The mind interprets this as failure or God's absence. Joel taught that the silence is actually the goal, not the problem. God doesn't speak in words because God isn't a person. God is consciousness itself. The silence you fear is actually the presence you seek. When thoughts quiet, what remains is pure awareness. That awareness is Christ consciousness. You keep waiting for something dramatic to happen, missing the fact that the transformation is occurring in the silence itself. Joel compared it to a seed growing underground. Nothing appears to be happening above the surface, but massive change is occurring in the invisible realm. Your consciousness is shifting, even when you can't perceive it. The external results come later, after the internal foundation has been established. Trust the silence. Rest in the silence. The silence is where true spiritual work happens. This requires patience that modern spirituality doesn't teach. You want instant results, immediate confirmation that you're doing it right. Joel discovered that real spiritual transformation takes time, not because God is slow, but because consciousness shifts gradually as false beliefs dissolve and truth becomes established. 3 months of practice is just the beginning. Joel practiced for 50 years and said he was still learning. The third major obstacle is doubt. You practice Christ consciousness and doubt creeps in. Maybe this is all delusion. Maybe Joel was wrong. Maybe you should return to traditional religion where at least you know what you're supposed to believe. Joel faced this doubt himself in his early years. He understood the temptation to abandon spiritual practice when results don't match expectations. Here's how Joel handled doubt. He didn't fight it or deny it. He recognized that doubt arises from the human mind, not from Christ consciousness. Consciousness itself never doubts because it simply is. The doubt is another thought passing through awareness. You can observe the doubt without being controlled by it. Let the doubt be present while you continue practicing presence. Over time, Joel noticed something remarkable. The more he practiced despite doubt, the less power doubt had. Not because he conquered it through willpower, but because consciousness was establishing itself as primary reality. Doubt still appeared occasionally, but it no longer determined his actions. He continued practicing presence whether doubt was present or absent. This is spiritual maturity. You don't wait until you feel certain to practice. You practice despite uncertainty, despite doubt, despite lack of external confirmation. Joel taught that consciousness develops through use, like a muscle. The more you practice recognizing Christ consciousness regardless of how you feel, the more established that consciousness becomes. Faith isn't believing hard enough. Faith is continuing to practice when belief wavers. The final obstacle Joel addressed was the problem of persistent negative patterns. You recognize Christ consciousness. You practice presence, yet the same problems keep appearing. The same relationship patterns, the same financial struggles, the same health issues. Your mind screams that the practice isn't working. Joel taught that these persistent patterns reveal deeper consciousness that needs addressing. Every external pattern reflects internal consciousness. If the pattern persists, there's a belief operating below your awareness that keeps creating it. Joel's approach was to sit in meditation and ask consciousness to reveal the hidden belief. Not asking God for answers, but letting your own awareness show you what you can't see. The answer always comes when you're truly ready to see it. Michael struggled with poverty consciousness for years despite practicing Joel's teaching. One day in meditation, the hidden belief surfaced. He believed spiritual people should be poor to prove they're not materialistic. This belief operated unconsciously, sabotaging every financial demonstration. Once he saw it, he could recognize it as false. Spiritual consciousness knows nothing of poverty. Within months, his finances transformed. This is deep work that requires brutal honesty. You can't heal what you won't acknowledge. Joel taught that every persistent problem is an invitation to discover false beliefs you don't know you're holding. The problem isn't punishment, it's teacher. As you bring these hidden beliefs into consciousness and recognize their unreality, the patterns lose power, not through effort, but through recognition of truth. If these obstacle-transforming insights are breaking through your spiritual barriers, like to support this revolutionary teaching, subscribe for advanced Christ consciousness practices, and comment, which obstacle are you ready to transform through Joel Goldsmith's wisdom? Joel taught advanced practitioners to carry Christ consciousness into daily activity, not just meditation. This is where theory becomes practical demonstration. You're in a business meeting and tension rises. Traditional response is to react, defend, or attack. Christ consciousness response is to silently recognize that only God is present here. Not God watching the meeting, but God as the only consciousness actually operating. This takes practice. Your human personality wants to engage in the drama. Joel taught that you can function in the human world while remaining anchored in spiritual awareness. You speak when necessary, act when required, but you're not lost in the appearance of conflict. You're recognizing that beneath all human interaction, there's only one divine consciousness temporarily appearing as many personalities. Linda practiced this in her toxic workplace. Instead of quitting or fighting, she began silently recognizing Christ consciousness as the only presence. When her boss attacked her, she didn't take it personally because she recognized both of them as divine consciousness having a human experience. The external behavior didn't immediately change, but her inner peace became unshakable. Over 6 months, something remarkable happened. Either her boss softened significantly, or Linda was moved to a different department, or she was guided to a new job. Joel taught that when you hold spiritual consciousness steady, the external must eventually conform. You don't know how or when. You simply practice presence and trust that consciousness knows what needs to happen. Another advanced practice Joel taught was recognizing perfection in apparent imperfection. Someone is ill. Traditional response is to pray for healing. Joel's advanced teaching was to recognize that in spiritual consciousness, there is no illness to heal. The body's appearance doesn't determine spiritual reality. This doesn't mean ignoring medical care. It means recognizing truth while dealing with appearance. David's daughter was diagnosed with a serious condition. Every instinct said to panic, to beg God for intervention. Joel had taught David to practice presence even in crisis. David sat with his fear, acknowledged it, and then practiced recognizing his daughter's true spiritual identity as whole, complete, and perfect, not denying her symptoms, but refusing to accept them as ultimate reality. The treatment process was difficult. There were setbacks and scary moments, but David maintained spiritual consciousness throughout. He didn't make healing the goal. He made recognition of truth the practice. Whether the body healed or not, his daughter's spiritual identity remained forever perfect. This consciousness gave both of them peace that transcended circumstances. The body did heal, but that's not the point. Joel taught dozens of students whose bodies didn't heal but whose consciousness awakened to eternal life. Physical healing is wonderful when it happens. Consciousness awakening to its divine nature is the real transformation. When you practice this advanced recognition, you're no longer at the mercy of external circumstances. You've found the peace that passes understanding. Joel's most advanced teaching addressed the problem of evil. How do you practice Christ consciousness when facing genuine malice, violence, or cruelty? Traditional religion says evil is real and God will punish it. Joel taught something radically different. Evil has no power except the power you give it through belief. This isn't naive optimism. This is spiritual law. When Jesus said, "Resist not evil," he wasn't teaching passivity. He was revealing that evil is appearance without ultimate reality. The moment you resist it, you make it real in your consciousness. The moment you fight it, you empower it. Joel taught that the only way to overcome evil is to recognize its nothingness. Not that it doesn't appear to harm, but that it has no actual power in spiritual reality. This is terrifying to practice. Someone wrongs you severely. Your mind demands justice, revenge, or at minimum acknowledgement of the evil done. Joel taught that this response keeps you trapped in the consciousness that attracted the experience. The way through is recognizing that evil is simply good misunderstood, truth forgotten, love temporarily obscured by human confusion. As you practice this recognition, something extraordinary happens. Either the situation resolves in ways you couldn't have orchestrated, or you're removed from it, or you develop such inner peace that external circumstances lose their power to disturb you. Joel wasn't teaching you to accept abuse. He was showing you how to free yourself from evil's power through recognition of its unreality. The final advanced practice Joel taught was becoming a transparent consciousness. This means you're so established in Christ consciousness that you become a healing presence without doing anything. People feel peace around you. Situations resolve when you enter them, not because you're special, but because consciousness operating through you recognizes only spiritual reality. Joel reached this state after decades of practice. He would sit in a room and simply be present. People reported physical healings, emotional breakthroughs, spiritual awakenings. He wasn't doing anything to them. His consciousness was simply so clear of personal agenda that divine consciousness could operate unobstructed. This is the goal of all spiritual practice. Complete transparency to truth. You don't achieve this through effort. You achieve it through persistent recognition of what's already true. Every day, you practice presence. Every challenge, you recognize Christ consciousness. Every interaction, you see divine identity beneath human personality. Over years, not days or months, consciousness becomes so established that it operates automatically. This is what Jesus demonstrated. He wasn't born special. He achieved complete transparency to Christ consciousness through practice and recognition. Joel taught that this same achievement is available to you, not because you're better than others, but because consciousness itself is your true identity. As you practice these advanced tools, you're not becoming something new. You're recognizing what you've always been beneath the layers of false belief. After decades of teaching, Joel reflected on what he'd learned about transformation. The process isn't linear. You don't climb a ladder from unconsciousness to enlightenment. You have moments of profound recognition followed by periods of forgetting. The practice is returning to presence each time you realize you've left it. This is the spiritual journey, not arriving, but continuously returning. Some students experienced dramatic healings and life changes within months. Others practiced for years before seeing external results. Joel discovered that timing wasn't the issue. Depth of realization was what mattered. You could practice for decades with shallow understanding and see limited change. Or you could have one moment of profound recognition that transformed everything instantly. The key wasn't how long you practiced, but how deeply you recognized truth. One student had a single meditation where Christ consciousness became absolutely real, not as concept, but as experienced reality. Her life transformed within weeks. Another student practiced